A wealthy billionaire handed a thick envelope of cash to a poor cleaner and asked, "Can I rent your children for 3 days to visit my village?" His request changed their lives forever. You won't believe the shocking secret he discovered after that strange transaction. "Thomas, my son," Mrs. Akoli's voice cracked through the phone speaker like a thunderclap before a storm. Thomas Akoli, CEO of the biggest conglomerate in the city, froze in his leather swivel chair. Outside his glass office walls, his employees were laughing and high-fiving, packing up their bags to enjoy the weekend. But Thomas sat gripping his expensive smartphone like it was a grenade about to explode. "Thomas, I am tired of the excuses," his mother continued, her voice low but dangerous. "You told the elders your wife and children are in the city. You said they would come for the New Yam Festival." "Mom, please, they are just busy with exams," Thomas stammered, nervously loosening his silk tie. "Busy? If they are too busy to greet the king, then you are too busy to be the next chief. The festival is in 2 days. If you come home alone again, I will hand the chieftaincy title to your cousin. Do not test me." The line went dead. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. Thomas lowered the phone, staring down at his polished Italian shoes that cost more than most people's yearly rent. He sat still, his face blank, but inside his chest was absolute panic. He nodded silently to the empty room. But the truth was bigger than what anyone in the village knew. Because Thomas didn't have a wife. He didn't have children. He didn't have a family at all. Just an empty mansion, a lonely heart, and a massive lie that was about to destroy his legacy. The silence in the executive suite was deafening, broken only by the hum of the central air conditioning, which suddenly felt too cold against Thomas's skin. He was still holding the phone, though the line had gone dead seconds ago. Mrs. Akoli's ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. "Friday," she had said, her voice devoid of the usual motherly warmth. "Come with a family, or return as a stranger." Thomas sank into his Italian leather chair, the expensive material creaking under the weight of his despair. He loosened his silk tie, gasping for air as if the room were filling with water. For 5 years, he had spun a web of convenient lies to keep his mother and the village elders at bay. He had invented a busy wife who was a neurosurgeon, and 2 perfect high-achieving children who were always conveniently in summer camp or preparing for exams whenever the village festival approached. He had sent money, renovated the village hall, and sponsored scholarships, hoping his financial success would overshadow his lack of a biological legacy. But money could no longer buy him time. The threat of his cousin Patrick, taking the chieftaincy title, was the final blow. Patrick was a man fueled by envy, a rival who had been waiting decades for Thomas to slip up so he could seize the family's ancestral authority. Thomas stood up and paced the length of his office, looking out at the sprawling city skyline he ostensibly owned. He had billions in the bank and thousands of employees who trembled at his command, yet in the face of village tradition, he was powerless. He was a king without an heir, a man with a hollow empire. He needed a wife and 2 children by Friday, or he would lose the only thing his money couldn't replace, his name. The air conditioning of the skyscraper hadn't cooled Thomas's burning anxiety. He stepped out into the blazing afternoon sun, his mother's threat still ringing in his ears. A family. Where on earth was he supposed to find a wife and children in 48 hours? He loosened his tie, marching toward his waiting SUV, when a commotion at the security post caught his attention. It wasn't the usual noise of city traffic. It was a singular, sharp voice he recognized. "You are a curse. A useless burden." Thomas paused, peering over his designer sunglasses. It was Andrew, the elderly cleaner who wiped the floors of the conference room. He was towering over a tiny, frail figure near the gatehouse. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dress was a patchwork of faded fabrics, stained and torn at the hem, and her feet were bare against the scorching pavement. Yet, she didn't wail or roll on the floor as one might expect. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her head bowed in submission. "I am sorry, uncle," she said, her voice small but shockingly articulate. "The security man said I couldn't stand by the flowers, so I moved here." "And so you decided to embarrass me at the front entrance?" Andrew hissed, raising a calloused hand as if to strike her. Thomas took a step forward, ready to intervene, but stopped. He watched as the girl didn't cower, but simply closed her eyes, accepting her fate with a strange, quiet dignity. "Please forgive me, Uncle Andrew. I won't make the mistake again." Her English was flawless, her tone respectful despite the cruelty being hurled at her. A jolt went through Thomas. She wasn't behaving like a street child. She had the poise of a princess in disguise. In that desperate moment, the gears in Thomas's mind clicked into place. She was poor, yes, but she was trainable. The air inside the cramped one-room shack was thick with heat and the smell of kerosene, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned luxury Thomas was used to. He stood awkwardly near the door, his polished shoes gleaming against the cracked cement floor, while Uncle Andrew and his wife Tonia stared at the thick brown envelope in his hand. Thomas didn't mince words. Desperate times called for desperate measures. "I need to borrow them," he said, his voice steady but low, gesturing toward Esther and little Richard who were cowering in the corner. "Just for the weekend. To visit my village. They will pretend to be my children, and in exchange." He placed the envelope on the rickety wooden table. The sound of the heavy cash hitting the wood seemed to echo in the silence. Uncle Andrew didn't ask about safety. He didn't ask where they would sleep or what they would eat. He simply reached out, his rough hands trembling slightly, and tore the corner of the envelope open. The sight of the crisp notes made Tonia gasp. 3 days. Andrew asked, his eyes glued to the money. "Take them for a week if you want, Olga." The transaction was sickeningly fast, stripping away any pretense of familial protection. Tonia snatched the money from her husband's grip and turned sharply toward the children, her face twisting from greed to menace in a heartbeat. She marched over to Esther, grabbing the girl's chin and forcing her to look up. "You hear that?" she hissed, her fingernails digging into Esther's skin. "You are going to a big house. You will eat big food. But if you embarrass us, if you make one mistake and this man asks for his money back, I will skin you alive when you return." Esther nodded, tears stinging her eyes, terrified not of the stranger, but of the woman who had just sold her time for a stack of paper. The sleek black Range Rover glided over the uneven red earth of the village road like a spaceship landing on a foreign planet. Inside, the air was cool and scented with expensive leather, a sharp contrast to the humid, dusty heat rising in waves outside the tinted windows. Esther sat stiffly in the back seat, her small hands gripping the plush armrest as if letting go would wake her from this terrifying dream. Beside her, her younger brother's eyes were wide as saucers, glued to the passing mud houses and waving children who chased the dust cloud trailing the convoy. She smoothed the expensive fabric of the new dress Thomas had bought them, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Remember the rich man, Daddy," she corrected herself mentally, had whispered sternly before they left the city, chin up. "You are royalty today." But she didn't feel like royalty. She felt like an imposter in a golden carriage, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. As the vehicle slowed near the sprawling Akoli family compound, the atmosphere in the village square shifted instantly. The usual buzz of market chatter fell into a hushed silence before erupting into chaotic excitement. Women abandoned their wares, and men paused their drafts games, stretching their necks to see. Thomas Akoli, the village's most eligible and elusive bachelor, had finally returned, and the rumors were wrong. He wasn't alone. Thomas took a deep breath, adjusted his designer sunglasses, and stepped out, the polished shine of his shoes blinding in the afternoon sun. He walked around to the back door and opened it with a flourish. When he lifted Esther out, a collective gasp rippled through the gathering crowd. She looked like a porcelain doll in the midst of the dust, terrifyingly out of place yet undeniably precious. The whispers spread like wildfire. Thomas had not just brought money this time, he had brought heirs. For Esther, the sea of staring faces was overwhelming, a wall of judgment and curiosity. She shrank back, but when Thomas's large warm hand engulfed her tiny trembling one, she felt a strange, unfamiliar spark of safety in the center of the lie. The air in the grand village parlor was thick enough to slice with a knife. Mrs. Akoli sat on her high-backed velvet chair, looking like a queen judge ready to pass a sentence. She didn't offer the children sweets or toys. Instead, she offered an interrogation. "Come closer," she commanded, her eyes narrowing as she studied Esther's face. Thomas stood by the door, his palms sweating against his expensive suit trousers. If Esther slipped up, if she used street slang or forgot the backstory they had rehearsed in the car, the chieftaincy was gone, and his humiliation would be absolute. "Tell me," Mrs. Akoli asked, her voice deceptively soft, "what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to take over your father's company?" Esther's small hands trembled, clutching the hem of her expensive new dress. She was terrified. In her world, the future only extended to the next meal, not corporate takeovers. But she looked at Thomas, saw the silent plea in his eyes, and straightened her spine. "I want to be a doctor, Grandma," Esther said, her voice clear and steady, "so I can help people who have nothing." Mrs. Akoli blinked. The room went silent. Then, a slow, approving smile spread across the matriarch's face. "A healer," she murmured. "She has a good heart. She has the Akoli spirit." Later that evening, the real challenge began at the dining table. The stewards brought out porcelain dishes filled with pounded yam and egusi soup, accompanied by an array of heavy silver forks and knives that looked like surgical tools to the poor children. Esther's brother reached out instinctively to use his hand, but stopped, looking scared. Thomas saw the panic in their eyes. Instead of being embarrassed by their lack of etiquette, he felt a sudden wave of protectiveness. He pulled his chair closer, ignoring his own food. "Watch me," he whispered gently, guiding Esther's fingers around the heavy silver fork. "Hold it like a pencil. Gently. Yes, just like that." As he taught them to cut their meat, laughing softly when the boy finally managed to bite without spilling, Thomas felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest. For the first time in years, the silence of his life was broken by genuine laughter. He wasn't just acting anymore, he was enjoying them. The afternoon sun beat down on the village square, where the children had gathered to play while the elders debated in the obi. Esther stood near the edge of the playground, her new expensive lace dress feeling heavy and foreign against her skin. She wasn't used to idleness. Her hands itched to help the women pounding yams nearby, but Uncle Andrew had warned her sharply, "Rich children don't work." Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. It was Rita, a sturdy village girl known for her sharp tongue and envy of city returnees. Rita sneered, circling Esther like a hawk spotting a chick. "Look at you," Rita spat, her voice drawing a crowd of giggling children. "Walking around like the red earth is too dirty for your shining shoes. Do you even know how to greet your elders properly, or do you just eat money in the city?" Esther looked down, biting her lip. She knew how to fight. She had fought for scraps in the market back home, but the contract bound her tongue. She had to be the perfect, polite daughter. Emboldened by her silence, Rita shoved Esther hard, sending her stumbling back into the dust. "Useless doll. You are nothing but a painted statue." The other children laughed, and tears pricked Esther's eyes, not from the fall, but from the humiliation of helplessness. Suddenly, the laughter died instantly. A large hand gripped Rita's shoulder, not painfully, but with the weight of absolute authority. Thomas stood there, his shadow engulfing the bully. He didn't look like a CEO negotiating a merger. He looked like a lion protecting his cub. "In this village, we respect guests," Thomas rumbled, his voice cold as steel. He reached down and gently pulled Esther to her feet, dusting off her dress with a tenderness that shocked even him. Turning back to the terrified Rita, his voice softened but carried a heavy warning. "She does not think she is better than you, but she is my daughter. And no one touches a hair on her head." He wrapped a protective arm around Esther's trembling shoulders and walked her away, leaving the village children in stunned silence. For the first time, Esther didn't feel like a rented prop. She felt safe. The drive back to the city felt less like a return home and more like a funeral procession. The air-conditioned silence of the SUV, which usually brought Thomas peace, now felt heavy and suffocating. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of Esther and her brother, their faces pressed against the glass, watching the green fields of the village fade into the chaotic, gray sprawl of the city slums. The weekend of laughter, of pretending to be a family, had peeled away a layer of loneliness Thomas didn't know he had, and now, putting that armor back on felt impossible. When the car finally crawled to a stop in front of Uncle Andrew's dilapidated shanty, the reality of the children's lives hit Thomas with the force of a physical blow. The zinc roof was rusting, and the open gutter nearby reeked of neglect. Uncle Andrew and Tonia were already waiting outside, their expressions shifting from impatience to greedy anticipation as they spotted the sleek vehicle. Thomas stepped out and opened the back door, his chest tightening as Esther slid out. She looked small again, the confidence she had gained in the village evaporating the moment she saw her aunt. "Thank you, sir," Esther whispered, not meeting his eyes. Thomas felt a desperate need to leave something behind, a shield against their bleak reality. He reached into the trunk and pulled out a large shopping bag filled with the expensive clothes and toys he had bought for the charade. "Keep these," Thomas said softly, handing the bag to Esther. "You earned them." But before Esther's fingers could even close around the handles, Tonia lunged forward. "Ah, thank you, sir. We will keep it safe for them," she cackled, snatching the bag with a sharpness that made the children flinch. Thomas saw the resignation in Esther's eyes. She knew she would never see those items again. He wanted to argue, to command them to stop, but he had no right. The contract was over. With a heavy heart, he watched the children disappear into the dark shack, leaving him standing alone in the dust, richer in money but suddenly bankrupt in spirit. The silence in the cramped, zinc-roofed shack was suffocating. Just hours ago, Esther and her brother had been sleeping on orthopedic mattresses under air conditioners, but now the stench of the open gutter outside filled their noses. Tonia sat on the worn-out rug, counting the thick wad of cash Thomas had paid them, her eyes gleaming with greed, but her face twisted in disgust when she looked at the children. "Look at them," she hissed to Andrew, pointing at Esther who was trying to wipe a speck of dirt off her brother's face. "They have tasted sugar, Andrew. Do you think they will agree to drink Gary again? They will become a problem. They will report us." Andrew nodded, his face hardening. The money was enough to move to a new apartment, start a business, perhaps even leave the city. The children were just baggage now, baggage that knew too much. "Get up," he barked, grabbing his car keys. "We are going for a ride." Esther's heart leaped. For a second, she hoped they were going back to Mr. Thomas, back to the man who looked at them with kindness instead of contempt. But the drive was long and silent. They drove past the city center, past the familiar streets, deep into the outskirts where the roads were untarred and the air smelled of raw fish and exhaust. They pulled up at the edge of the sprawling Oyingbo market, a chaotic ocean of noise and bodies. "Get down," Tonia ordered, shoving them out. "Wait here. We are going to buy bags for your school things." Esther held her brother's hand tightly, the noise of the market overwhelming them. She watched Uncle Andrew get back into the driver's seat. He didn't look back. He didn't wave. The engine roared to life, and before Esther could even shout "Uncle," the car screeched away, disappearing into the thick cloud of dust and indifference, leaving them alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too dangerous. Thomas tossed and turned, the silence of his massive bedroom feeling more like a cage than a sanctuary. The image of Esther's sad wave as he dropped them off refused to leave his mind. Driven by a gnawing instinct, he grabbed his car keys and sped back to the shanty in the dead of night. The door was swinging on broken hinges, the room stripped bare. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. Uncle Andrew had fled. Thomas drove frantically through the blinding storm, scanning the roadside until his headlights caught two small, shivering figures huddled under a collapsed market stall. He didn't care about his Italian leather shoes as he splashed through the mud, scooping Esther and her brother into his arms. They were soaked to the bone, clinging to him as he carried them into the warmth of his mansion. Mrs. Acoli, awakened by the commotion, rushed into the living room. As she dried Esther's face with a warm towel, she froze. Her gaze darted from the girl to the mantelpiece, where a framed photo of Amara, Thomas's lost love who had vanished years ago, stood. The resemblance was undeniable, the same almond eyes, the same stubborn chin. "Thomas," his mother whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed. "Look at her. She is Amara's child." The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. The next morning, a rush DNA test confirmed what his heart had already begun to accept. The results were a 99.9% match. Thomas broke down, tears streaming onto the paper. He wasn't just a lonely man playing pretend anymore. He gathered the confused children into a crushing hug, vowing to never let them go. "You aren't rented," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You are mine. You are finally home."